Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Winning with Insights podcast. My name is Mike. I am the founder of GTM Diagnostics, a go to market research agency specialized in win loss analysis. Today, with me, a very special guest. Today, we have Matteo. He is the founder and owner of Genesys Growth, a go to market product and marketing and content consultancy. So, Matteo, before we get in, please quickly introduce yourself and maybe share a little bit more about your background so that we know who we're talking to today.
Thanks so much for having me, Mike. Great to be here. Yes, I'm Matteo. As you mentioned, I run since a couple of years my own product marketing and content studio called Genesys Growth. I've been in marketing for just under a decade, serving founders and marketing teams from mostly in B2B SaaS, from pre-seed to Series B, and had some experiences also in late stage organizations. Like I've run marketing for the UK for the likes of Fiverr.com just before they did their IPO. But my heart really belongs in early stage startups where I can be in the trenches and build the 0 to 1 of anything marketing.
Awesome. Yeah, that's quite a specific group that you're working with, and it's like your background, like it kind of speaks for itself. Makes a lot of sense, of course, that you can provide a lot of value there. When we're taking a look at like the product marketing, creating content and stuff like that, like what are some of like the most common problems that your clients are actually facing when you start working with
Yeah, great question. I think like one of the main things that I'm approached by clients is trying to help them solve their messaging and positioning, which I think is one of the foundational strategic aspect of any go-to-market strategy that has massive and horizontal downstream impact on basically everything that relates to distribution channels. So it impacts like messaging, impacts your website, it impacts your ad messaging or ad copy, your outbound, how the sales team also pitches the product, how they compare the product that they're selling to competitors, as well as how customers understand about the product. How do they compare it with other alternatives that they're using, not necessarily competitors, but also DIY or manual alternatives. And obviously the content topics and tone that you use to build authority in your industry and again, sell the product for also inbound motion, right? So because messaging and positioning has this massive impact, there's still a lot of lack of clarity and understanding as to what are the good, what's a good process or a good framework for actually getting this right. Also, one of my beliefs is that founders, because they don't have maybe like the specific knowledge about messaging and positioning, and also because it's a very qualitative and subjective, if you like, aspect of marketing, they maybe don't really understand how to measure it or put a KPI to it. And so they say, let me focus on what I can actually measure and report to investors on. And hence they under invest into it. They under index into it altogether. And that has this massive impact on go-to-market that I just mentioned, which is what I call GTM dilution, because it basically dilutes all the messaging that you're going to market with, and it ultimately dilutes your go-to-market because your customers don't understand what problems you're solving, what your product does, what are you comparing yourselves to. And so back to your question, I think this basically is one of the key things that my customers approach me for. They say ultimately, on my website is out of date, or we need to update that, or I need to start doing content on LinkedIn or on SEO, but before actually jumping into that, I'm always try to really dig deeper into how do you feel about your messaging and positioning? What are your top 3 competitors? How are you different from them? And these probing questions really, most of the cases, find like uncover a weakness or a lack of alignment and understanding and conviction in this underlying messaging and positioning exercise.
Yeah. Okay, so just to wrap my head a little bit around it. So the main issue or the main subject basically is like it is actually the messaging and the positioning.
Mm-hmm.
And there are like certain things that go into this. So there how I would like to describe it is there's like a process problem. Like basically like, hey, there are certain things in the process of making sure that, for example, when you're trying to like add another channel for content, for example, like how are you going to do this? Like that, the how question basically. But taking it a little bit like back, it starts with the clarity. So there's more of like a why issue there as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, how are you going to basically position yourself towards your competitors, towards the problems, towards everything that goes underneath. And then there's like a down the line effect, what you call the dilution.
Mm-hmm.
And that is like if the beginning isn't there, like in the end, like there's nothing basically. And then like the metrics part is a little bit different because it's sometimes very difficult, what you already said, to like measure
Mm-hmm.
the qualitative things. But that is for me, I would basically align this with the process, right? So there's a process in place and there are certain metrics that you can track that are successful. Taking it like a step back, like how can we even identify as a founder
Mm-hmm.
that our positioning and messaging might need to be tweaked or better or whatever? Like what are some of the things that you would basically look at that would help a founder identify that this is the issue?
Sure. I think there's a couple of things. One is, when, the sales team or the founder, if the founder is selling themselves, interacts with customers and customers don't understand straight off the bat, what does the product do? How, what does what does the product help them achieve? How do they measure success with the product related to the specific use case? And what is the product is compared to other alternatives? That's normally already like a signal that if there's a lot of back and forth or not, straight up understanding from customers on this, that's already like the key signal that there's something there. Also, another
Mm-hmm.
signal, which probably is less related to customers, but more related to the founder, is that they have conviction that they're building a new category and they have no competitors. You know, uh,
Mhm.
when and which is something that I get a lot. But ultimately, you need to understand that you're not cooler if you're building a new category. It's actually much harder. And it's not cool if you don't have competitors because it's going to be much harder to drive awareness, A, of a new category, and B, of a net new solution that has no other alternatives to compare to, because you need to basically, because it means that the customers or prospects you're selling to are not just solution unaware, but they're also problem unaware. So you need a lot more investment in content, and you need a larger time horizon, to nurture your audience and educate them as to not just the solution that you're selling, but also the problem that you're solving. So these are also other things that can be solved with positioning and messaging, because ultimately in this new, obviously AI it is a new paradigm, for example, and that is maybe like a net new solution with no problem, with no net competitors, at least like 2 years ago when ChatGPT started out. But ultimately, even AI compared to doing things manually or DIY, right? So you could the same research. And so what I'm trying to say here is that even net new categories like AI, when they started out in 2 years ago, they could still be positioned against an existing alternative in the prospect mindset. And that means that, and that's like what I call people in my industry call positioning anchors. You need to anchor a specific product or category to an alternative that already lives in the imagery of the customers today.
Yeah, I cannot agree more. Like, there is always an alternative, because the way that you solve a problem might be different, but the outcome that you're trying to achieve, or that your customers are trying to achieve, like, they are still trying to achieve that outcome. The way that they might do this is completely new, as like you're a new category, for example. Like when we first started out with the CRM software, like, yeah, this is a completely new category. Yeah, true, but the outcome of like, hey, me understanding like all my conversations and interactions with my client, they're in my notebook. Like, there was an alternative, right? Even though the entire new category of the CRM like came into fruition. So take taking this into like consideration, like there are always alternatives based on an outcome which you can anchor yourself towards. Like, is there like a difference then for companies that you work with that use like a different business model? And what I mean by is this different for a product-led company versus a sales-led company, for example? Because a lot of SaaS businesses, and I imagine a lot of them which you work with as well, they might approach like their go-to-market a little bit differently.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you see that the positioning and messaging is actually of biggest impact if this is done wrong?
Sure. I mean, a great question. I think one of the key differences that comes to mind here is that when you have like a PLG product, which is ultimately a self-serve motion, I think you need to focus the part, like bigger part of your positioning and messaging to appeal the champion, which is like a hands-on builder and user of like daily user of your product, right? And so in that regards, I think core of your messaging, especially on your website, but also on your onboarding and your main channels, is going to heavily be focused on capabilities of the product. So what does the product do for you? And the specific use cases, right? So what is the product for? And this is obviously targeting specifically the champion. And that's why with PLG motions, like for example, Miro, we see a lot of this messaging or positioning strategy, like trickling down into their content, which is like heavy on templates or landing pages about the use cases, right?
Yeah.
On the other hand, when you're more in sales led, you're ultimately going to have like you're targeting a buying committee, right? Which is more of a buyer persona as opposed to like a champion, right? And we're maybe like looking more at a group of people that are more like senior executives or budget owners or middle manager and above, basically. In that sense, you might want to reorient your messaging more around and anchor your messaging more around benefits and what's the end state of using the capabilities, right? And these are, or specifically maybe like how do they measure success? So KPIs, right? And so how does using the product specifically move the needle or get them to that, like move that specific KPI compared to their current alternative, right? Or their current current state. These are just more on a tactical level in terms of
Yeah.
the highlights of the messaging. And basically, this could help you then, in practical terms, reorient the hierarchy of these messages in placements like landing pages or outbound emails, enablement assets, or content marketing if you're more for PLG.
Yeah. And then because for sales, you basically mentioned like, hey, like the messaging could be off or your positioning when you have to do like a lot of explaining what you actually do, what you actually solve for, like what the use cases are, etc. How can we identify then if we are a product led or more of like a self-serve business where our salespeople, they're non-existent, so we don't have the direct customer feedback. We have to basically take a look at a lot of data to understand what's happening,
Mm-hmm.
um, which is not always complete or present. Like how can we then identify as a product led or self-serve business that our messaging or positioning is off? Like what would you look at, for example, to understand if this is the issue?
Yeah, I think this is a very good question. Ultimately, again, when it comes to sales led, it's more in the kind of like customer conversations when people tell you, "Oh, I got what you do," and if they don't if you don't get that as a salesperson, but you still get people to ask you deeper,
Mhm.
that's probably something that you need to look into. When it comes to PLG, it's obviously because you need to rely, as you said, a lot more on data. You can still have proxies of that when you do content marketing. For example, let's say you post on LinkedIn and you have a new product launch, so you announce a new feature, a new product update, or you do just like some day-to-day founder-led content or just content. The comments under the engagement on social can already be like a good proxy as to, do people understand what is are they interested, do they match my ICP? Like the people that comment or that engage, do they match my ICP? And so I think like that could be a good enough proxy to understand whether the messaging resonates. You can also rely on harder metrics like conversion rates, for example. But ultimately, I think like it's much harder to understand in this regards. You can rely on conversion rates on a website or even subscribers of a newsletter, right? Because that means that the content resonates, which means the messaging that stems from the content should also appeal. Resonance, again, like matching with the SCP. But then it's still harder to understand because you also need to really look into what kind of traffic are you driving, because if sometimes like the traffic that lands on the website is not the right one, then it's a little bit, it can be deceiving to measure the conversion rate as a reliable metric, basically that is that backs this kind of like insights or conviction.
Like my first thoughts when I'm hearing this, like there's, even if you are trying to set up a self-serve business or a PLG-led SaaS company, like you need to understand like who you're talking to. Like it doesn't, like if it's like a one-to-one through sales or it's more of like a one-to-many through marketing. Like you need to have like a good understanding, I guess. Like you need to like first do a little bit of research, like make sure that from the get-go you know what problems you solve, who you solve it for, what their desired outcomes are, and like what alternatives you're competing with. It could be like a direct competitor, like a Salesforce versus a HubSpot versus Pipedrive, for example, even though they might target a little bit differently. They're all CRM systems. There are also other alternatives, like you said, it could be a DIY, it could be a consultant, it could be, I don't know, if we're trying to increase, for example, the amount of leads, like there we could, an alternative could be sales automation or marketing automation, video content, or I don't know, just go to events or whatever. Like there are so many alternatives that are competing for the increased leads portion. So I, that is my first idea. Like you need to like be able to have a good foundational understanding to get things going.
Absolutely.
And
I
then,
wanted to like
yeah,
answer your question, but like before I do, like also like something else came to mind as I heard you speak, which was basically another interesting metric to understand does positioning and messaging upstream works in PLG. You can measure that by people that jump in to sign up and activate and engage with the product aha moment right away. Because if they if they understand exactly what the product does, and how it helps them, then they will have no trouble signing up, doing like finding the right thing to do that get them to the aha moment and
yeah,
to product value, and then stick to it or build a habit with it, right? So activation and time to activation, or exactly time to aha moment or time to habit moment. I think these are also like metrics that can really help you
yeah,
understand if the messaging also works. And again,
yeah,
like it shows back to what we were saying at the beginning of our conversation, how, the impact, the downstream impact that it has also
yeah.
on from messaging itself. So messaging itself. But back to your question, which was,
Yeah, how can you identify that this is an issue? That is basically like the
I know
core
you
because
said like that we need to
yeah,
have like a foundational understanding of the ICT,
yeah,
right? Or who we're talking. I think
yeah,
that's also, it can be quite challenging because, um, it depends obviously which kind of like product you're building in which industry. But ultimately, um, this can come like the founder or the founding team has conviction that they want to build a product for a specific audience, right? But
yeah,
then eventually, they're going to test, build an MVP, test it out, launch it, have keep doing like customer development and research with the first cohort of users. But then they might, understand that or they might find out that that initial persona is not really the one they're targeting. And so they are maybe like led onto a soft or hard pivot, both in terms of
yeah,
persona or in terms of product, or in terms of the use case within that specific persona product capability pair. So I think that's a much harder things to know for sure, but it's you need to be fairly open-minded and you need to have like a great ultimately instinct and interpretation for
yeah,
understanding where to go or where the opportunity is. So that's obviously one of the hardest things to do, I think, in tech
yeah.
startups.
Yeah, especially like the phase of businesses that you work in, like the phases that they're in. Like they're if you were talking about like the pre-seed towards like Series A, Series B,
Exactly.
Series A and B, they're probably already what you might call like more on like the product market fit level already. But in the pre-seed, like there is still so much that can change. Basically, everything can change, and it depends, I guess, also a little bit on do we want to work for this specific persona, or do we want to solve this specific problem, or do we need to find like the right audience for the product that we have, which is, I don't believe, the best idea, but still, it could be a way to go forward. But what might be then some of the how do you say, like misconceptions when it comes to like this part, like the understanding of the root causes, basically, or no, let me not say root cause, but what are some of the misconceptions that you might have when it comes to identifying that the positioning and messaging is off? Because
So misconception, please help me understand a bit more. As a founder, people don't know whether it's off or not, or
now for me, it could be that. So when we're looking at sales, for example, that we have to like explain a lot what it is that we actually do and what we solve for,
Mhm.
then like our misconception could be that, for example, that it's not about the messaging when this is happening. It's about, I don't know, our targeting, for example, or it could also be that our salespeople, they just suck at doing like proper discovery calls or outreach or
Mhm, mhm.
whatever. So because there can be many root causes when it comes to, like, for example, having to better explain yourself in your sales calls.
Mhm.
Um, so there, or maybe even that there's like some sort of bias that you think you understand. So that is not the issue.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there are always a lot of misconceptions when it comes to like certain problems, basically, that exist.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Thanks for clarifying. I think it goes back to a few things that we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast. One thing that I would start with is that you know the founders ultimately they have very very strong conviction about how they should sell the product and how they should communicate it and how what is for. In some cases, it is not always the case, but especially when the founder is not marketing savvy, um, that could lead to what I call the founder's bubble, which means, a little bit of um, self-constructed beliefs that of how the product should be communicated, should be categorized, without necessarily a specific, process or structure, and that ultimately trickles down not into how in the marketing, but also into the sales, right? And so that ultimately leads to this dissonance between the how the company pictures itself and how the customers understands it, or what they would like to what they need to hear, basically. So that's one thing. The second thing is the one that I mentioned before, which is I don't understand how messaging and positioning is done. Um, so I'm just not going to do it. I'm going to skip through the investment. I'm not going to hire exactly like a product marketing person, for example, to help me do it. Um, and so I'm just going to skip through it and do like the quick and dirty thing that is obviously going to get me the GTM dilution effect. Or another thing.
Okay,
Oh,
so
yes, sir.
yeah, no, go ahead. Like if you want to add to this, yeah.
Yeah, or the last bit is I'm not doing it also because hiring a PMM is expensive. It's hard to find a seasoned one that will join me um, early stage, and also it's hard for me even if I do hire them and I take the money out for this type of investment. It will be very hard for me to justify this investment back to investors because
Yeah.
it's very hard to measure, and it might have a longer term ROI payback, basically, right? And so I think these are a few of the misconceptions that get people to skip on the foundational groundwork and do the go for the AI general content route, and basically what they do exactly is that they jump right into channel marketing or distribution. So I'm just going to use a ChatGPT to create my blog posts, create my emails, and create my ads without a clear prompt or input of the messaging. So everything is gonna feel and look like the masses that use ChatGPT in the same way. And this leads to what I call the fast foodification of content and brands, because we had basically a lot of brands that are just using these AIs in the same exact ways. And that's why we see all these buzzwords like, innovation or groundbreaking or impact, popping everywhere in the content, because it is just determined by the quality of the inputs, right? Because there's no investment in building differentiated brands or like exactly or a differentiation. What makes me different? What makes me better? There's not this investment, which is basically at the core of the messaging and positioning. Then it's all trickled downstream, and that's where we see, a bunch of lookalike, basically brands out there.
Yeah, if we tie it back to what you initially started with, like it's the foundation, making sure that you're anchoring yourself for your customers so that they understand what it is that you do for them, and then basically position yourself as like a better alternative towards this. And then basically they need to understand also then how this will work and what it will provide them with. And then this is like the clarity, I guess, that you talked about as well. And when you're considering like what might tell you then that this is happening or that this is the case, well, you need to like explain yourself a lot about what it is that you actually do. So there's like a lack of understanding. And then when we're looking a bit more at like maybe the metrics, is that conversion rates might drop, or there's not a lot of engagement on your posts or on your content, or like the type of leads that come in are not an ICP fit. So these are all things that could be looked at to say like, hey, like if these things are happening, then it could be that positioning and messaging is an issue that we have. But then there are certain misconceptions that, hey, if we just use an AI bot, then it will provide us with all the things that we need. But then that results into like the fast foodification, as you already said. And then everything is basically a little bit of the same. And then there's also like this maybe misconception into the ROI of working on this, which is something that I cannot imagine myself, because for me, it makes so much sense that if you have a very clear message and a very clear position within the market that you're active in, that it just helps. Like there's so much proof out there basically that this is such like what you said, like a foundation to success. And then I now want to go maybe a little bit more into, hey, like we've now identified that the messaging and positioning is something that we need to work on. We're after like at the end of our talk, we're going a bit more into like, hey, how can we then maybe take a look at this and tackle this? But I also might want to take a look at the process where things might be off. So I can imagine that even if you have like a very good positioning and messaging, that you could still experience some of the issues like long sales cycle lengths or low conversions when you're not using your message in the right way. So more of like a downstream, what you said, like the process to make sure that you do not dilute. What can maybe be some of the things that can go wrong in this process that lead to dilution? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I think again, like it's similar to what we've been discussing, right? It's the quality of the inputs that you're using to come up with the messaging might be unbalanced or just plain wrong, right? It might be unbalanced in the sense that it could be under indexed on just the founder's vision and less on customers' research and or competitive intelligence, right? Or it could be again like a process challenge as to, I have all these bits and pieces of customer quotes and competitors' insights and founders' vision, but I don't really know how to piece them together in a coherent way. And then I don't know how exactly where which message should be placed throughout the customer journey to make sure that the machine is oiled and the prospect goes through the final stages, if that makes sense, right? Going back to what we were saying before, obviously, if you're targeting like buyer or champion, messaging is got to be different, right? The social proof that you're leveraging, also to enhance the conversion or to support the messaging that you're pushing to these to your prospects, to these different prospects, it might be different, right? If I'm targeting like a champion, I want to show them like the product. So maybe like a demo video, would be a nicer creative or a nicer proof point that supports the claim made by the message, which in that case is focused on product capabilities. If I'm targeting a
Yeah.
buyer instead, a case study with a customer quote and a logo of the quote that resonates, that is maybe like in the similar industry or firmographic size of the target, it would be a better fit that supports the messaging again on the claim that the messaging does, which maybe is more oriented in that case on the benefits and the KPIs of how they measure success, right? So that can be also like things that go wrong, right? And in same ways, sales pitches and training. So how the sales team is actually trained to talk about the product, to how the team is empowered by, again, product marketing or sales enablement, specifically with the right assets. Is sales enablement giving sales the right battle cards, the right sales decks, the right comparison content, the right infographics or ROI calculators. Is the sales team really empowered with the tools to close the deal?
I like this. So it's how I would summarize this for myself. So we might have like our foundational messaging and positioning might be good, like good enough to work with. But then if we then do not have the quality of input, as you stated it won't generate the quality of output. And then how I would summarize what you just said is basically like, hey, it could be like the bias that there still is existing within the heads of people. It could be that there's a lack of skill, that you're actually able to translate all these insights into like engaging content or engaging messaging across the different channels, across the different stages of the customer / buyer journey. And then like the third piece would be like, hey, are you actually providing the right tools to even do this? Right? So those are for me like the three main issues that could still exist within the process of making sure that you don't dilute too much. Is there anything you would like to add to this, or did I summarize this?
No, I think like it's
Well,
what I would I think is super on point. What I would add is exactly like how do you also organize like the inputs in a way that and then leverage the right ones, at the right touch point or channel, depending on
yeah.
who you're targeting. Because again, it could be different, right? So I think like that's also,
I,
and that's especially true for horizontal type of products that target different use cases or different industries, and within those industries, or maybe like exactly even for like more enterprise when they're targeting like buying committees with
Yeah.
multiple actors that need to take a decision.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, for me that sounds like skill, because then you're
Yeah, that's fair enough.
you could be like like unaware incompetence, or like even aware incompetent, and then it's like, okay, like if you are unaware incompetent, it's like, oh, that's really shitty, because then you need to have somebody that helps you to understand that you actually have an issue, and then you have like the I'm aware that I'm not doing this right, but I'm still not able to actually fix it. And then you go into like the, hey, you become competent, but that's well, you can basically hire for competence, hopefully. Um, but I would still put that under skill, because you understand that you need to like not only have like one message,
Mhm.
no, the message need to be tailored to the specific personas, to the specific ICPs. And then the personas, like, hey, we can go levels deep in personas. We have like the user, we have the champion, we have the economic buyer, we might have like a strategic buyer as well. Somebody that's more of like above the line versus below the line.
That's
So there's a lot that comes into this as well when you go into like the nitty gritty.
Yeah, and I think well,
Um,
I would definitely add something to this that is like super important. Is like kind of like also a misconception is that like founders like have very bold vision of serving obviously as much as possible of their total addressable market, and they don't realize that their total addressable market is very very different from their service serviceable addressable market or
yeah,
their service obtainable market, which is what they should be targeting today, you know.
yeah,
And so maybe
yeah, no,
pushed by investors to target to cast the widest net as possible, but they need instead to be focused on maybe like a very narrow niche today to then get to expand later. And so that comes across in that messaging because they tend to
right,
that's reflected basically in a one size fits all messaging. Like I'm going to target, I'm building a productivity tool and I'm going to target all knowledge workers. And I'm like, it's very hard to cut through the
right,
noise or be relevant or be convincing if you're targeting, like all men, or all women in the world. We're building a product for all women in the world. Okay, thank you. But, it's going to be very hard for me to drive urgency with such a large audience. And my recommendation is usually try to have one launch for one specific, persona or industry, whatever it matters the most to you. I was like launching like helping launch like a new product release for one of my customers like the other day, and it was Black Friday, and there was like a specific use case that was clear that on Black Friday, retailers are probably the key in terms of like the massive like traffic spikes and all of that. So I was like, why don't we just like focus the Black Friday announcement on retail only, right? So that we appeal more to them, But on the other, like they were like, oh no, we shouldn't be forgetting about the fintech or the media and streaming. And of course, like we can use this, we can launch, do a dedicated launch as a fast follow, but that's also one of the just an example that shows how
yeah,
there is like so much FOMO on the founders side that they want to
yeah,
it works really against them, like both in
yeah.
the short term and in the long term, because you're going to dilute the in this example the Black Friday announcement for retail, and you're going to like dilute that messaging, and then you're going to dilute the following ones as well.
Yeah. That's it. Like identifying your high growth segments is
Focus as
key,
well.
and they can switch depending on like the type of customers that you serve and the industries that you're active in.
Mhm, mhm.
I'm curious. What has been like what do you believe? Let me put it like this: is the most successful way of niching down? Like, I'm curious because there are so many ways. Like you can say, like I'm just an industry niche, or I'm a persona niche, or I'm a industry persona niche, or I'm a use case niche, or like what? There are probably a lot more other ways to niche or niche
Sure.
down. I would say niche. That's a good word.
Yeah.
So what do you believe is the most successful way of like focusing slash niching?
That's a great question, and I think it really depends again on your capabilities and how or like what's best for you. For example, we can take even myself as an example, right? I'm a service provider, and it's I've been my experience or my capabilities have been very much of like a marketing generalist. So like I've been doing not just product marketing and content, but a lot of demand generation, paid advertising, and other like I had like a very broad set of capabilities to offer that could add value to my clients, right? And so I kind of like decided to start niching down into because I wanted to make sure that I could offer all these services that also were, I thought I could add value to, but they were also like professionally fulfilling for me. So I decided to niche down into a specific industry, and I decided, for
Right.
example, to cut off B2C or consumer marketplaces and just focus on B2B and specifically SaaS, because that's also where I've had most of my experience coming from, which cemented
Yeah.
basically my social proof and credibility, right? So this is like in this case, I decided, but it's ultimately a strategy, there's never like a right or wrong answer. You need to understand like your context. You need to understand what you can bring to the table, and you need to pick a path and go with it. And then eventually you can adapt it or change it. For example, after being, after marketing myself as a generalist, or head of growth or head of marketing, let's say
Hmm.
in B2B SaaS, now I've understood also that it's much better to niche down further. And so I decided to, niche down on the capabilities angle or on the services angle, right? Which is product marketing and content. And this again,
Right.
it's helped me group together a lot of more different use cases. And the use cases can be, how do I drive, traffic to a website, or how do I drive subscribers to a newsletter, or how do I increase conversion rate of sign up? These are like my use cases, but it
Yeah.
helps me group a broader set of use cases within two macro categories that are fairly understood by my target persona. And
Yeah.
it helps drive more word of mouth and virality when I do a good job with my clients, because then when I like one of my clients go to Mike and say, "Oh, I need someone that needs to help me with product marketing, or needs someone that help me with driving, like redoing my website." Mike can tell you, "Oh, Matteo is the one that can do these one or two things," because if you then like offer too many services or too many things, then even there, you're gonna incur your own dilution, right? Because there's gonna be
Yeah.
like way too many other alternatives that come to mind, but if you're good at one or two things and you're actually like really good at or really great at, I think like that's, where you want to be.
That's such a smart answer. Like I always hate it when people say it depends. So of course it depends, but I want you to be black and white today because that's way more fun to talk about.
Perfect.
No, but it's true. Like you need to be smart. Um, then that also raises the question, like, is it the choice or is it the execution on the choice? What would you say?
What do you mean about that? Oh, I like, how would you actually?
Like if I say like, hey, like I provide go-to-market
Mhm.
research for B2B. businesses within SaaS and service industry, ranging from 50 to 250 employees that are active within the Western European market that have like a recurring business model.
Right.
Like, is it that choice for me that is holding me back, or is my execution on that choice holding me back?
And what do you mean by execution on the choice? Actually, like working only for the...
Yeah, we're like yeah, because if you say like, hey, like I'm a productivity tool for like IT or like DevOps managers in, I don't know, enterprise businesses within the retail industry, specifically when they sell only pink t-shirts. I don't know. Like that is very specific DevOps person, right? There are not a lot of companies probably that only sell pink t-shirts, but that is my persona. Like I built a productivity tool specifically for them. Is that choice holding me back from success, or is it my execution on my messaging, my outreach, my getting them into like my productivity tool?
It's,
Like what is...
I mean, ultimately, it's a mix of both. You know, sorry to give you like another offense,
that's always, like I said, it always depends.
but you know, I think
yeah.
it's a combination of the two because they basically feed into each other, right? You know, ultimately, I can pitch myself as you know, going back to my example, you know, like as this product marketing and content advisor, and then I start with a client that for, you know, let's say messaging positioning, and then they tell me, oh, by the way, you know, I also need help with outbound or setting up like the emails. And, you know, I could be like, no, this is not something I do. You know, I have some partners that I can bring in and help you do it. Or I can also say, yeah, I mean, I feel like doing it, you know, I feel a bit rusty. So I want to, you know, get back into like, you know, reactivating that muscle. I know I can do it, especially at this level of complexity or like, and, you know, so I could be easily doing it. You know, same goes with paid advertising and so on and so forth. And so in that sense, I would be, back to your, you know, to your question, like betraying, let's say, the execution of my positioning, right? But at the end of the day, you know, and it really depends on the bigger scheme of things as to what you want to like be remembered for, and also how many of these, you know, what was the percentage of the actual work that you do matches your position? Because if most of the stuff that I do is like 80% of the stuff that I do is still, you know, product marketing and content, then I think it's still fair to position myself as such, you know, like, and that ultimately it's going to compound on the virality or how I'm going to be remembered by my customers, and B, on the which that will feed back into the people that I will attract as prospects, right? And on also the content that I would use to promote myself to attract these people, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm just curious because how would that then look like for the customers that you work with, right? Would you say for them that it's more of like the strategic choice, like the clarity, basically, if we want to call it like this, or would you say that it's more on like the process, like the input towards output side of things, for the people that you work with specifically?
Well, I think like it also depends like how narrow or broad you want to be, right? You know, because you know, like I think like my journey into niching is slower than others. You know, like for example, like I can see like another group of people that, or like peers that I really look up to in the product marketing space is the Fletch PMM guys, Anthony Pieri and Robert Kaminsky. And, you know, they are product marketing consultants, and they niche down into one category, which is product marketing, and one use case only, which is homepage for B2B SaaS, right? Early stage B2B SaaS. That's
Yeah.
how they do. But they do one thing over and over and over, and only one thing, and yes, they say I think they do also some product pages or use case pages if you'd like, but that's literally all they do, and I think that
No.
is a choice, and that they manage to scale, they have an incredibly tight knit process that I also, stole and rejigged as well with my
Yeah.
list, because I think it was a genuinely an amazing framework, and um, and not just that, but they basically managed to scale this process to a very large volume, and they served over 300 startups, so I'm sure they
Yeah.
have they managed to balance, scale with quality, with clarity and speed, right? So kudos to them. I'm just going back to the choice and executing on that choice. I'm more of a person that needs context switching. I need variety and variability in my product. In my work, will it work against me when it comes to, word of mouth and process improvements and all of that? Most likely, but that's ultimately a choice that works.
Yeah.
It's a trade-off balance, I think.
No, it depends on, of course, what you want to get out of it as well. Hey, if we also we know for the B2B SaaS pre-seed all the way up to Series B, who have identified a problem with their messaging and positioning. So it could be that people don't understand what it is that they do, leads are not converting, etc. They bring you on and say hey, Matteo, we need help with this. Can you maybe then take me through the process, like high, high level process that you take them through to make sure that they are at the end successfully like high quality input to high quality output generators, basically.
Yeah, sure. So what I do is I ask normally the head of marketing or head of sales to first send me over a bunch of customer calls, recordings, transcripts. And
Mhm.
the first part of my research is basically inputting with a very detailed prompt, this 5, 10 transcripts into ChatGPT and extract key messages based on specific components of the messaging frameworks that I use from each of these calls. So it's basically an intelligent way of parse and extract and
Yeah.
categorize, key messages from high quality sources, and it's basically the output looks like a table where every column is a customer call, and every row I have components of the messaging framework, like the
Yeah.
persona, the firmographics, the problems, the pain points, the use cases, the KPIs, and then the alternatives. Again, we already talked about that. Alternatives,
Mhm.
problems, pain points arising from those, and then capabilities, benefits, and differentiators. And then some customer quotes, basically to substantiate each of these components,
Yeah.
right? And that already gives me a very good overview of how the customers, what the conversation is like between the sales team and the customer, the
Yeah.
prospect, and how they picture the product. And then I have a back and forth with the go-to-market teams to make sure that these outputs are um, effective or
Mhm.
accurate, and ultimately add any nuance that comes from their specific opinions or experiences. Then I run the same exact analysis or like similar prompt with competitors' websites. And so I basically just scrape like 3 to 5 websites and extract the same amount, the same type of information. And then I start to cross-check also, the customer call transcript with with what came up in the competitors' research, like to understand what are the gaps, in terms of like messaging, what are the overlaps, to basically identify, what is the best way to exactly what are the best anchors to select to then craft the positioning. Like, do we need to specialize ourselves based on the industry or based on the use case or based on us solving a specific problem or highlighting a specific capabilities because the competitors don't have it or because the customers want it more, right? And ultimately, the corollary of this, or like the third key source to add to the mix, is like the founders' mission and vision and what they want to, like their unique POV as to how they think the space, what they want this space to look like, with their company and product in the mix, and more, let's say, a more proactive. If we're basically doing like passive or reactive analysis from customers and competitors, this would be a more proactive component, or like that the founder wants to inject into the market. And so I'll have probably like a 30 minutes call, and then run the same type of process to mine the specific elements and angles, and then we put basically everything together into a messaging and positioning framework, which has these components and summarizes these key elements. Product X is targeting this firmographics in this industry, this persona, primary and secondary. Specific for this persona is trying to pull off these use cases 1, 2, 3 as measured by these KPIs, right? And that's the kind of like first role. And then we can basically run through the analysis of the competitive alternatives. We're competing against DIY or manual work. Then competitor 1, competitor category 1, competitor category 2, adjacent player 3, let's say. And then from all of these, what are the problems that are and pain points for our persona that are arising from using all of these? And this is how we're better. So we're basically, as a mirror of these pain points, I'm crafting differentiation messages. So how we're better compared to each of these alternatives specifically, and then distill, that differentiation messaging in basically one USP can be. For example, in my case, I don't know, can be speed or quality or, service. So these are kind of like the unique selling points. And then you basically doing the same type of analysis, but instead of working the differentiation, you're towards the differentiation, you're always working back from the alternatives, and you're mirroring, as a mirror, you use the capabilities. So competitor 1 has this problem. The problem leads the persona to experience this pain point. And as a mirror, my feature X is doing capability Y that solve that problem, that specific problem. And by using those capabilities, I get that benefit, which is ultimately is anchored back to my use cases, giving me the benefit to achieve then my use case, and is measured by the KPI that I care about, basically.
Yeah. So for how this comes across to me. It's like, hey, we're going to start with like a research phase. We're going to do the customer research, the competitive intelligence. We're going to do the internal research with like the founder vision, the go-to-market team's input, and then we're going to run the analysis. And then basically this is like understanding the what, the why, the what, and the how, basically, so that you eventually know what to anchor against. And this could be different things. And then based on the research and the analysis, you're going into like, you're creating the output. And these are basically like the frameworks that you mentioned. So
Right.
this is like, and then there are so many different frameworks in different places and basically like content types, if you want to call it like this, or content places where you're going to generate this output for. Could be on like a comparison page, could be your main page, it could be for the blog posts or whatever, it could be different landing pages for different personas, like based on the anchoring and stuff like that. So that's like what you do to make them successful. There's this like a good summary basically of
Yeah, very much
how it
so.
goes.
I think then exactly, basically like
Awesome.
this framework is, again, as you mentioned, the starting point, if you'd like, because that
Yeah,
fun part comes when you actually take the messaging framework and you inject it into a website or other
exactly.
TMS,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. That's like like I said, like you're going to create the output
Correct.
basically then. Yeah.
Mhm.
Cool. It sounds good, man. I think it's a very like positioning and messaging. It's like it's always such a fun thing to think about and to work on because it's like you said, it's like the foundation for everything. If you have this done correctly, like your marketing becomes better. Like you can create higher quality like marketing assets that you're going to share with the world that are relevant for the specific people that you're trying to serve. Like sales becomes easier. Like even if you're product led or sales led, it doesn't really matter. Like the sales process becomes just more streamlined when you understand who you're talking to, what your point of view is basically, and how you can help them become successful and translate this again into like assets that will help you become more successful. And what a lot of people also, I think, don't realize is that if you get the right people in, they're also more unlikely to leave. So in the end, indirectly, it will also help with churn and retention.
Absolutely.
But that's not like a direct focus. Maybe on like new product launches and with competitive intelligence, it becomes more and more relevant, of course,
Mhm.
because you want to like stay ahead of the competition and make sure that you keep serving your customers in the right way. But this is more like on the front end, basically. I like this, man. This I like this process. I like the problem. I like the way that you talk about it, even though I don't like the it depends. Oh, I'm kidding. Like I totally get it. Hey, if somebody wants to basically get started with you, like they're a B2B SaaS founder, they might just have like their first seed round investors that gave them a shit ton of money to like start like building their business and conquering the markets that they want to go after, and they need to work on
Mhm.
their positioning and messaging. Like, what's the best place for them to find you and get in contact?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there. So post quite a bit on all the topics that we talked about. So definitely hit me up there with a DM. You can also find me on my website, genesysgrowth.com, where you can just like book a call and hit me up with any of your questions if you just want to, yeah, pick my brain on anything that we covered.
Awesome, cool. Hey, and then before we close off, there are always like these two questions which I want to end with.
Hit me.
And they're a bit more personal. They don't have anything to do with work. Well, they do, but in a different way. If you can go back to when you first started with your entrepreneurial journey,
Mhm.
like what is one thing that you would tell young Matteo to keep on doing?
Uh-huh.
And what is one thing that you would tell to your younger self, like, hey, stop doing this immediately, ditch it right away?
Mhm.
What would you say to yourself?
Yeah, awesome question. I think like one thing that I would probably start doing that I maybe like I was not doing was post on LinkedIn earlier. And because, it's, a great marketplace for enabling businesses to connect with each other. And so, my SCP is there. And so just showcasing the work, showcasing how you work, it will get a lot more business in, and it will build, it makes you learn faster and learn deeper about, because by sharing your work, you ultimately need to structure it, think through what you're saying, how you're saying it, and that is a learning process in and on itself. And so that compounds over time, and it builds a muscle. And so you're not basically just investing in building, deal flow and lead generation, but also in authority and personal brand. But it also, you're actively learning about your industry, because you're also like researching and getting exposed to other creators and other leaders. So it's a great vehicle and feedback loop that I wish I did earlier. I started, basically this summer to be very, very active. But that's one thing that I would definitely tell, my younger self to do more. One thing that I would instead stop caring about is imposter syndrome, because it's something that I've come to understand and learn that, especially for people that like consultants that need to share work, and maybe to share their work, they need to find their own work and clients, and obviously tolerate periods of volatility in their business. It's something that never really goes away. And it's something that you need to actually learn how to live with. And once, you realize that, you ultimately are a lot more incentivized to just be out there, but also be yourself. And that really shows not just in the quality of the business relationships that you have, but also the quality of your sleep when the work close your laptop, and you feel a lot more fulfilled, tranquil, and ultimately, I'm not, I know how to deal with it, and that, it makes you feel again good about yourself.
I think that's a good one, man. Like, it's funny, like the building a personal brand. Others have shared it as well. Like they would get a lot more out of it if they started sooner. And then I like the imposters, and I think that's a good one. I think that's something that a lot of people underestimate. It can be a blocker for so many wonderful things if you're just oh a little bit less caring about what others might think of you, and start focusing basically on just doing what you love and sharing about that as well.
Pretty much.
Yeah. Hey, thank you so much, Matteo. For everybody that's still listening, like if you want to get in touch, I'm going to make sure that all the information is in the show notes so that you can find Matteo easily and get in contact with Genesys Growth. For now, I hope you had a valuable time listening to this conversation, and I want to invite you to the next episode. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks again.